So we have to start with a very, very important question, Michael. Does pineapple belong on pizza?
I have had good Hawaiian pizza.
Yes.
It's just like Comic-Con. We all belong.
We all okay. I like that.
I don't
that's
like
a
to.
good answer.
I just don't like to yuck other people's yums.
That's fair.
Yeah, so I think that's my best answer.
Do
I like it? Not my first choice, but again, I would never begrudge someone's taste.
I appreciate that.
No problem. It's a diplomatic
very
answer.
craftful answer. Yeah, that was good. So as an actor, I'm sure you've been on about a million auditions. Do you have any...
More than a million.
Do you have any, fun, goofy, or just straight up bad audition stories?
Oh, shit. Bad audition stories. Oh, my God. Well, I like to think I never audition badly.
Of course.
I mean, I can tell you a cool audition story.
Yes.
I auditioned once for a Stephen Merchant show, an HBO show, and I was a huge fan of The Office and Ricky Gervais and all that stuff.
Right.
And I got to have a callback with Stephen Merchant where he flew into New York to meet with 5 people, and I was one of them. And he basically put each of us in a room, and we improv for about a half an hour. So I have this badge of honor that I got to improv with Stephen Merchant in a room for half an hour and made him laugh.
Cool.
So that was cool. Trying to think of another good or awkward or weird story. I auditioned for a play once where I did this monologue, and I did this really big Shakespearean monologue where I was pulling out all the stops and props and this whole thing. And at one point I took off my shoe, and it was part of the thing. It was really funny. And I left that room being wow, I killed it. I did the most amazing thing. And the only feedback I got from the casting office was, I don't know, he took off his shoe and smelled it. And I was like, cool. I'm glad that people were paying attention. Yeah, I made a choice. And it's funny, I say these days, every audition is awkward because 99% of them are self-tapes.
Yeah.
Because all the casting offices are closed now. And
right.
Are you an actor? I don't know if
Yes. Yeah, a little bit.
So you get it. So I fucking hate that shit. It drives me crazy. My wife has to do all these things, and we inevitably get into a fight in the middle of it because it's nobody needs that as part of their relationship.
Right.
And you have to be the editor, you have to be the cameraman, all that stuff. So there are times when I'm how am I supposed to do 10 pages trying to get a blank wall in my house with my kids running around and all that stuff. So I would say almost every audition I have these days is just awkward. In terms of it's set up and having to try to figure out how to do it. And then those things get shot into the ether, and who sees them? Nobody? Somebody?
We never know.
We never know.
We
rarely get feedback, but
right.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I've been in situations in casting offices where, in person, where you think you're going to go in and be all charming, and then you just get a stone wall back, and you're not received well. And then there are times when you get cast directors who are just the loveliest people who love actors, and they want you to be as good as you can be. So, it just sucks in general.
For sure, it's a process for sure.
I mean, that's our jobs. People don't realize that being an actor is auditioning. It's not acting.
Nope. It's auditioning and rejection, and then eventually you get to actually act.
Yeah, hopefully, the money you get on that 1 or 2 jobs makes up for all the bullshit that you have to put up.
Yeah. So getting into your newest project, this podcast, changing mediums is very difficult. I listen to podcasts that would be really interesting if the hosts weren't just so boring. So,
have you heard my podcast?
I haven't actually, so you're safe for now.
The first 2 episodes dropped last week, but
awesome.
Yeah. So I got nervous. I was like, okay.
So how is kind of shifting mediums? Because people can't see you. You are only as animated as you sound.
Right. I was just talking to somebody about this. I'd like to think that I'm a good conversationalist, and that I never have a lack of thought. You know what I mean? I could spew words till the cows come home. But the key to good podcasting, I've learned, and it's very trial and error, because when I first started doing it, I was like, what? You have to. It's all about listening and giving that space and breath to the interviewee, and letting them take their own journey to where they need to go in order to give you an interesting conversation. And so many times where I'd be in these conversations and have all these notes and think about where I see it going, what I want to talk about, and then suddenly they'll say something that's just so maybe personal or interesting that I didn't know, and then that takes the conversation to a whole nother realm. And I think ultimately what people want to hear from an interview style podcast is not just something, it's not just about inside shit about movies and the making of stuff. That's all cool and interesting, and a lot of these stories you've heard a million times, but it's hearing these people as human beings and like their own journeys and their own thoughts and feelings and what they put into their craft and their art, and kind of giving back to the audience in that way. So we're all kind of like I wanted to feel like we're all kind of hanging out in a bar and having a conversation, as opposed to a stilted sort of sycophantic Q&A, you know?
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, I definitely have like the ips, right? So like it's hard for me to sit still. I have a ton of energy.
Yeah.
Whoever's, I don't know if someone's listening to this or you're just going to write this, but like you can see how like I have a lot of it. And so to have to sit for like 2 hours to interview somebody, first couple times, really hard for me. I was like moving around and all this stuff, but it's like anything, you know, like my background is theater, so like when
So you were taught to be very physical.
Yeah, so like when I sort of, you know, graduated to doing more film and TV stuff, there were techniques. I don't believe in that whole thing about like, well, there's theater acting, there's film acting. It's all the same. There's just technical things you have to sort of shape and sculpt in order to make it make sense for different mediums. So I think it's the same way for this. It's like, I'm still bringing my unique personality, my perspective, my thoughts, my energy to it, but there's just like a different way of sculpting it, a different way of crafting it, and you know, it's a learning process.
I love that.
I think all of this is a lifelong learning process. So, but it's fun to try new things.
Yeah. What spawned the podcast? Like, what inspired you to start this?
Yeah. Well, I was doing Punisher, knowing that I was going to die. I just kept thinking to myself, how is it possible for me to like keep this going? Like, I didn't want to leave the Marvel universe. I wanted to like do more. I'm a huge fan of all this shit. I'm someone who went to Comic-Cons before I became someone at the Comic-Cons or whatever. And I remember I remember it super clearly. I was on set, sitting next to Amber Rose Riva, who played Dina Madani, and we were sitting in our chairs, our actor chairs, whatever, waiting to film something. And the idea just struck me, and I was like, wouldn't it be cool if I like did a show where I interviewed other people who died and shit and got their stories too? And she was like, oh, that's a good idea. I'm like, I think it is. And literally, it just like popped into my head because I was like thinking, could I pitch something to Marvel where I just stay in the Marvel universe somehow? Yeah. And so I ended up pitching it to Marvel, and they loved it. We were going to do it. It became a bit of a rights issue because of Netflix, and so they weren't able to... They couldn't really promote content from within the Marvel TV shows anymore because of the deal expiring with Netflix, and now obviously all that stuff's on Disney Plus.
Right. And
I don't get paid for any of it. Thanks a lot, everyone. But yeah, so like it just kind of evolved from there, and then at one point I was going to do it as like a TV show, or I was going to sort of host like a geeky TV show, and the whole concept of playing dead was going to be a segment. Originally it was called You're Dead to Me.
I love that.
And then kind of during COVID, I came back to the idea of doing it as a podcast, and pitched it to Lionsgate and Pilgrim Studios that works at Lionsgate, and they loved it, and just happened. But it was like, I'm glad it happened this way, because this is the way it kind of turned out is exactly how I envisioned it from the start, and I think it's very authentic, and it's also allowed me to, because it's not Marvel, it's allowed me to interview people from all universes, and so... And
there's no shortage of TV deaths to explore.
We haven't even gotten into TV deaths yet. I mean, some of the actors we've talked to in this first season have had TV deaths, and we've touched on a couple of them, but like, I mean, I want to do a whole season on TV deaths.
I love that.
You could do this podcast
forever.
Till you're dead.
Yeah.
Pun intended. But it's true, like there's just... I mean, I have a list of like a billion people and a billion movies I want to like talk to people about. And
that's amazing. How do you decide who to approach to be a guest?
It's not about who it's who decides to say yes.
I love that.
It's more about as you know in this side of the business, which I'm learning. When you're doing a new podcast, even though it was Lionsgate and had some name, and I have a little bit of a name value, maybe.
Sorry, I got distracted by the droid.
Yeah, I don't blame you. Amazing. Hi, R2. Thank you. And that one. What was I talking about? So sure. I started with a dream guest list.
Yeah.
And
you put it out there.
I put it out there, and I will tell you that like a lot of them did say yes, but a lot of my dream guests were not the most famous people. But to me, I thought about for myself as like a fan and as a kid growing up, like what were my iconic deaths that I loved, and so I had to like pull some strings and like go behind people's reps and kind of directly contact them to get them. A lot of the people on the first season are friends of mine, so I just would call them up and be like, hey, do you want to do this with me? And they were like, of course, like let's do it. And so that a lot of those conversations are very, you can tell that we're just like friends and it's very natural.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, it was that weird combination of, are people willing to, and I think once the podcast now is out, we just got a big headline, and The Guardian just called us top podcast of the week.
That's
and we had a
awesome.
nice headline in The Guardian and a really nice review blurb from them. And so I think that was like a real boost for us. So I think, crossing fingers, they want to do more. I think in the future, we'll probably have more of a better pitch.
For sure.
Because initially the pitch is like, oh, he's this actor and he's doing this podcast. And we're like, oh, like every other podcast, like every other actor, blah, blah, blah. But as soon as somebody somewhere is like, that's good, suddenly everyone's like, oh, what about what about so-and-so? And so I'm hoping that we get a little bit more, if we can keep doing it, we get a little bit more yeses than nos.
For sure. But
what I was very happy, and I think the people we got are a lot of people that people don't hear from. They know them and they love them and they love the iconic deaths that they have, but because they're not always on the front page and a lot of them are not even acting anymore, to revisit those things, it was really cool, and I think kind of a cooler choice. And so we'll see. It's not about getting the most famous. It's about getting the right artists to who want to talk about it.
Absolutely.
Or enthusiastic about it.
Yeah. What's it feel like for you? You say you were someone that went to comic book conventions and stuff.
Yeah.
What's it feel like for you to be a fan that is now a part of this in a very different way?
It doesn't feel like I'm separate. Do you know what I mean? It feels like I won a contest usually. Aww. Or that I you know what I mean? And I'm suddenly I'll do it. I'll be that guy. And I feel like going forward with everything that I do on this side of it, because I also do a lot of writing and producing and stuff like that, but when it comes to this podcast, and I'd like to do more sort of behind the scenes stuff for the fans. I want to be, I cherish the notion of being the voice of the fans in a very authentic way, and because I can speak with that voice, with that that perspective. But yeah, it never gets weird, never gets old. I sit in the green room. William Shatner comes in. I become a kid in a candy store. I beg to say hi to him. They say you can't. I'm like, okay, that's fine. All I want to do is meet other people. I go to these, even when I'm going as a guest or whatever, and I hear so-and-so's going to be there, my first question is, can I get a picture with them? So I have all these pictures at home, and I always ask, it's a fucking thrill for me. So,
I love that.
Yeah, and I love meeting other people who are enthusiastic about this stuff, and it's such a beautiful, welcoming, open community where, people who love pineapple on pizza and people who hate pineapple on pizza can all come together and love each other.
That's the dream.
And I want it to be, and I would say, just riffing off of that idea of don't yuck other people's yums. My problem with conventions sometimes, and with a lot of journalism that's written about geekdom, is that it gets vitriolic and
very much
too opinionated and too much my camp versus your camp. And I think it's great to have debates about what people like and don't like, but I celebrate everything that people like. I had this really fun thing happen to me where I went to Star Wars Celebration this year, and I was with somebody who was significantly younger than me, who took me to it, and there was a whole thing about Obi-Wan, and doing a whole thing about that, and the prequels are not my movies. I'm not a huge fan of the prequels. Whatever. I don't want to I don't like to talk a lot of shit about things I don't like.
Yeah.
But when Ewan McGregor and Hayden Christensen came on stage, the person I was with was so excited. And in my mind, that person should know that the prequels aren't as good as the originals. But he said to me, he was like, well, I grew up on these movies.
Yeah.
These were my Star Wars movies. I was a kid when these movies came out. And so that, for me, is a thrill to see that. And so when you think about it that way, that fandoms are not rooted in what you love. It's the idea that it's an evolution, and you should love that and love whatever anyone else loves, and just love the idea that there is love for all this stuff, and people, regardless of color, creed, religion, politics, they can come together and fan out like this. That's what this is about. And so I want to bring as much of that into my journey on this side of the table as possible and like keep that good energy.
I love that so much. That's an excellent place to leave this, actually.